video, I want to talk you through a hiring bias debate that is occurring on Twitter. It's between people who support the H1B1 visas for migrant workers, typically Indian-born migrant workers, which is supported by Vivek Ramaswamy, Elon Musk, Trump to a certain extent, and the MAGA movement, which are typically anti-mass migration and anti-migrant workers. They're about prioritizing the American workers. And this image you see on your screen shows the divide. The MAGA bros, the MAGA Make America Great Again people who support mass deportations or at least not taking more migrant workers, and then people like Musk, other billionaires who are quite in support of H1B migrant workers, typically from India, to work in maybe the tech sector for a relatively lower wage compared to American workers. I'm going to go through the perspective of white libertarians or right-wing leaning white Americans. I've covered Indian Americans' perspective in previous videos, and I've also covered the perspective of black Americans. So we're going to go into white Americans, but let me give you a bit of a background into the particular debate that's going on. Firstly, Trump was appointing several people to roles within his administration. One of them was, of course, Vivek Ramaswamy, looking at efficiency alongside Elon Musk. Another one was an appointment for the policy, which was Sriram Krishnan, who is, as you can see the name here, he was going to be working on AI for the administration for Trump. There's other hires within his administration, such as, I believe, Kash Patel, who's going to be working in the FBI, working on the feds to help clean that up for Trump too. So there's different Indian hires, and then on to a further debate around skilled migration, H1B visas for Indian migrants to work in the tech sector in America, and all sorts of debates of like whether that's appropriate. Lots of MAGA supporters, Make America Great Again supporters like Laura Loomer and people like that were very critical of this approach from these billionaire Trump supporters who are effectively not putting the American worker first, right? So we're going to hear the perspective of these white Americans and how they feel about this particular initiative.
Or politics, by, let's say, India, for example. Now how it happens is open for speculation, but you have to ask yourself this question. It's like, we've seen what it does on a cultural level, on just a civilian level, when you integrate or attempt to integrate vastly different cultures into one another. What ends up happening is they homogenize, they become their own little in-groups, and there is which is a lack in cultural cohesion, right? If you want to talk about the fabric that makes up America, the fabric is full of holes because everybody is isolated and they're remaining in their own groups. They're not integrating with one another. We have this illusion that that's what happens, but you need only look at like Chinatown as an example of that. Like, they will pull away and they will create their own self-sustaining in-groups where they don't actually have to interact with the rest of America at large. That happens on a civilian level. What happens when it starts happening on a political level? And people start bringing over, and this has always been the issue, right, with America. But of course, if you said anything about this, you were racist and intolerant. But it's like you have a completely different belief system. Give me a second there. A completely different belief system that is at odds with, if you believe this is a Christian nation. And not only are they integrating on a civilian level, but now they're integrating on a political level. And that you're going to see the ramifications of that. You're going to see that culture bleed in from above and below now. And I'm not saying that that's good or bad. I'm just saying, expand on that. Where does that lead?
Yeah, well, this is my concern, actually, is that because white people are the only people that don't do that, it does seem as if it's a competitive disadvantage. Like, yeah, you're going to lose because you are not collaborating to look after one another, whereas everybody else is.
And any attempt to do that is, like you said, Clint, seen as racism, even illegal on a business level.
Exactly. So I just want to be very clear. I don't want to do that. Right. I don't want to, because I don't identify with all white people and go like, yeah, you're my brother. Like, that's not how I look at the world. And unfortunately, a lot of other races do. And it's like, because I was born into that mindset, or, schooled into it, I don't know which, I'm very hesitant to go down that line of thinking. And I think that it's extraordinarily divisive. But at the same time, if you're not going to demand the same sort of colorblind worldview of minorities, well, then you are mandating that white people start to do the same. Right. And I like, this is going to be a very controversial thing for me to say, but I think I'm absolutely fucking right, or I would not be saying it. This is how countries fall apart, especially a country that's built on diversity. If you don't demand the same thing of the minorities as you do of the majority, well, then you're fucking destroying your country. Right. Okay? You can't have different rules for different groups of people. That was the whole idea of America, is that it was going to be, like, that's the thing.
Yeah, you adhere to American culture. You're whatever you are second to being an American first.
And just blind, but also we. Like, that's how we looked at it. Everybody was going to, if you work hard, it doesn't matter what you look like, doesn't matter what your religion is, doesn't matter what your sex is, you're going to fucking make it in America. If you, like, assuming you don't have, bad luck. That is dying on the vine, because you only apply the rules of colorblindness to the majority. And I just think it's racist too, because you're permitting minorities to white people poorly. Whereas we would never allow for white people to do that in reverse. And in fact, we do not allow it.
White people can't be victims of racism because power structures.
Exactly.
White people have always had power and thereby have always been the enforcers of racism. And,
which is why critical theory is so dangerous. Go ahead, Tom.
Right.
Look at that, like, so take a step back.
So just to follow up on this, right? So this is the thing. Competing globally when it comes to the workforce poses a lot of challenges, right? Normally the natural state of humans is to be quite community and tight-knit driven, in terms of having a tight-knit community in a small and this is the thing, is the human nature is more focused on localism rather than globalism, right? Globalism is completely unnatural. If you look through the past centuries, people would travel, they would trade resources, but people can only value their close-knit community, maybe their country at most, right? And the key to freedom is about decentralization, not centralization. And you look at decentralization, so many good examples there: crypto, Bitcoin, local farms, farmers markets. People naturally driven to support more freedom when it comes to being decentralized, right? And supporting your local community is just how you do that, right? Rather than supporting these big corporations that have no problem hiring, foreign workers for a low wage, exploiting the foreign workers, and by paying them a lower wage, but also exploiting the workers in a country, for example, American workers, by not paying them a living wage that they can survive on and have a family with, right? The thing is, current form of capitalism we have, it's like centralization capital or crony capitalism. It's not really too big to fail. A lot of these major corporations, they get bailouts if they face any difficulty, particularly the banks. So we don't really have a capitalism where the best and the brightest succeed. And particularly you can see this in corporate environments where it's all about people having the right leftist political DEI type of agenda, or supporting ESG and all these type of economic forum type of weird, essentially socialist ideologies is how you succeed in the corporate world now. Is not necessarily being the best and the most qualified. So it's kind of gaslighting when you have these major billionaires like Elon Musk and others who talk about, we need more foreign migrant workers because the workers in the West are too lazy. And it's a bit like you've set up not them personally, but the system has set up all these initiatives and all these incentives to disincentivize hard work, high tax. Also, you have like a lack of family formation, dysfunction between genders, completely ridiculous public schools where if you want to raise your kids and you don't want them to be brainwashed, you would want them to be in a private school or homeschool them. So there's so many incentives against people participating in society, working hard, being an employee, when it's like, what's the point, right? Particularly when you're going to not give them a wage where they can even afford to do some of the basics. So when we realize that homogeneity, which is basically people from a similar background, probably is better. Having some protectionism from other tribes or other countries is better. And what he's saying is around in-group preference, like white people or people in the West have been conditioned not to be too judgmental on other people's race or demographics and hire whoever is the best person for the job. But obviously in lots of communities, migrant communities, people only hire people from their own migrant community, right? I'm not saying that's always the case, but for a broad example, you might have people from Eastern Europe who move to London, they'd hire other Eastern Europeans, maybe from the same country as them. People of a certain religion typically hire other peoples of their same religion, particularly if they're from a migrant community. They only want people from their particular in-group. But if white people or lots of people in the West haven't been trained to do that, or that's been out of view through the diversity and tolerance and inclusion narratives you're fed your whole life from schooling phase, you don't have the same tribalism that other demographics have. And as you can see, tribalism is working successfully. I'm not going to get into all the contentious issues going on in the world right now, but you can see any religion that is super focused on helping people of their same religion, they're doing quite well. They're quite a powerful, tight-knit group. And that applies for many religions that are quite strongly held together. Same thing with different migrant groups from different countries, right? Think about them when they move to the West. They have their own little communities. They support their own small businesses. They're very self-sustaining compared to other individualist type of culture in the West, where people are isolated, not looking out for people's best interest, builds a low-trust society. And then there is something to be said about the different cultures, right? About white people or white kids maybe going to the mall on the weekends, Asians studying harder on the weekends. There is a cultural difference to be said there, right? Where the US culture has moved from a culture of greatness to a culture of consumerism. And I think an interesting point around this is, what is the best type of culture? And that's something that I've covered throughout these type of videos. Now, there's a term called warrior scholar, and it's come up in different ways. I think it was one European philosopher said that, you need to have athletes and scholars, and people need to be scholarly and athletic, which means you have to master your mind and master your body to build a healthy society. And that should apply to everyone, right? Rather than just focus on intelligence for people to work good jobs, or people to focus on working out from a sense of vanity, because having a balance of the two really breeds virtue and good characteristics, not just drone workers. And I think that's probably the healthiest society. And you might have seen it in the past, maybe in ancient Greece, ancient Rome, ancient India, places like that, where if you look back, you're like, oh, they did have a bit more of a balance there. And like I say, I'm not saying everyone and their kids should basically be studying all the time, building skills to become better drone workers and puppets on a string for major corporations to pay them a low wage to work hard with technical skills. But there is something to be said around culture of excellence and how that can be glorified if American culture or Western culture are going to change. And the thing is, there's also these different type of dynamics when it comes to what extent are we looking at quality when it comes to hiring migrant workers, whether it's H1-B1 visas or other migrant workers in the West. Are they good at doing a decent or okay or low quality job for a decent wage or low wage that corporations are happy with? Is it resulting in an overall decline in living standards because people just accept that, okay, they can get a job done for cheap from a migrant worker, but the quality might be lacking in construction, in coding, and that's a frequent criticism you see come up again and again, right? And the thing is, to what extent does integration work, even if it's good for the economy or good for billionaires because they can get low-cost labor moving to the West? Immigration, as I say, becomes quite tribalistic. You have these isolated groups, like a Chinatown or isolated migrant communities where other people don't feel welcome and they kind of end up moving out. You see these type of enclaves, these kind of migrant enclaves that occur all throughout London, throughout other major Western cities too, right? And the thing is, the key point he's making here is, do white people need to be more tribalistic, right? Because other groups have in-group preferences, as I say, hiring their own, looking at their own best interests. But if white people don't look out for their own, or maybe have a bias towards their own race, which is kind of not permitted by law, of course, then they end up losing out to other demographics who are kind of more self-interested and more tribalistic, right?
Say this though, I want to put an asterisk on that. You said I want them to become Americans. That's
yes.
super important, but
yes,
look at America. What is America? There's no cohesive culture, so when they come, they bring their own. Yeah, there's no loyalty from them to us. They're just here collecting a check and using our economy, and then who knows what else.
You're absolutely right, and this is the point that I was making earlier: is that if you don't demand of minorities, which includes immigrants, obviously, they would naturally be a minority. If you don't demand of them the same thing you do of the majority, the domestic-born Americans, and particularly domestic-born white people, well, then you are asking for trouble. So I am of the opinion that, yes, I am not opposed to all immigration. I think that what has made America special is that it is trend-setting, just their country and travel thousands of miles across the ocean, particularly before fucking air travel existed. These people were lunatics. My great-grandfather was a fucking savage. I don't know what the hell he was thinking. I would have never done that. That's crazy shit to do. Totally uncozy. But then again, I think he was fleeing Germany during World War I, so it probably made sense. But anyways,
infinitely less cozy.
So much less cozy than me.
Isn't it funny though, Clint? Because it's like the thing that you're asking is very reasonable on its face, but we've been recently handed this like engineered culture that took a long time to engineer, by the way. It was engineered by politics. It was engineered by the feminist movement. It was engineered by Hollywood and everything else that's been just feeding us this garbage to the point where a very reasonable ask is now determined to be racist. That's a racist thing to ask people.
It's also why I didn't really jump down Vivek's throat or Elon because I was busy on Christmas Day doing something else, a lot more fun. But it is a reason why when you see these things, like this is my knee-jerk reaction, and I'm like, I hear people using this sort of language. I'm like, what are you getting at? What are you getting at? Because underneath this, like I've seen this kind of ploy before, and at the end of it, it's usually some kind of weird psyop from the left. So where are you
I also don't like the demoralizing language. It's like, have we not beaten down white American men enough for the past, half a decade or something like that? Like it's gotten to the point where it's disgusting, and it's given rise to, if there ever was a time where racism in America was a trope, it wasn't real, right? It was like we went through this period of time not long ago where we were so overusing a word that it diluted the actual cases of like real vicious racism, right?
Yep.
And so
Tower Gang tonight 9/11.
Tower Gang.
If you're into that.
But now it's just gotten to the point where that word means nothing anymore, and we're still beating white dudes over the head with it. And now here comes this guy who, can I paraphrase, seems to be more or less saying the reason we are winning is because you are not good.
What it seems like.
Look, I understand why that would be offensive, but that has been the conservative argument for years. That basically academia is churning out subpar midwits that think that they're fucking awesome and they're useless. And let me tell you, as someone who used to run a company, that's true. The vast majority of young people are fucking terrible. They're
It's funny
idiots.
because academia is also pumping out that aforementioned culture that we just described. That was the epicenter of it.
But it's merit to his argument. I think the reason that people are rejecting it is because he is Indian American.
Yes.
And he's just a bad messenger for that particular message. But it is true, and every conservative has said this forever, is that you have all these people that now rule over us, this fucking midwit class that comes out and enters HR and enters the government, but they come out of Ivy League schools, so they think that they're fucking brilliant, but they have been poisoned. Their minds are poisoned, and they are not capable of actually contributing to a functioning, growing civilization. In fact, they are destructive. They are, in their core, they have imbibed of Marxist ideology and critical theory, and they're now fucking a danger to the rest of us. So this is why I actually oppose Donald Trump's position, which is funny because the people who are most upset with Vivek also are just usually lionize and love Donald Trump. He came out 6 months ago and said he wants to staple a green card to every college degree for any immigrant that comes here and gets that education. And I'm just like, fuck that. I want to deport the people that go to Harvard. And I'm not talking about immigrants. I'm saying American born. They are probably the most dangerous people in this country. So I just think that my concern is that the dissident right Nick Fuentes circle, they are not focused enough on the underlying problems domestically as much as they are the border. Like they understand the concerns of the border, and I'm not saying that they're wrong to have them, especially when you have fucking 10 to 20 million people come in a single presidential term. That's insane. But they do not harp nearly enough on the fact that domestic-born Americans, including white people, are crazy people. And they can't possibly excel, and they can't contribute to the civilization because they have been brought up through public school and then put through academia, which is controlled by Marxists, and they fucking come out at the other end useless. And no one talks about that.
Thank God they're only taking minorities in these higher positions now, because they'll start coming out retarded. But it gives me a little bit of hope, and it's like a weird racist hope, right? Because I think Ann Coulter said it about Vivek Ramaswamy. She's like, you'll never be president. She told him to his face. She
said, I would not vote for you because you're Indian.
And she's right. And she's right. Now the guy's a smooth talker. He has great hair, like real high up, but real nice hair. I mean, he's got it all. But the fact is like you have this different look. So Donald Trump comes and says basically the same thing that you're saying, but I don't want to hear it from, and I don't want to hear it from Vivek Ramaswamy either. Change your name to something more English, and maybe it would go.
Yeah, do it.
It's just true.
There's an Indian guy that owns the corner store.
If his name was Vic Johnson, I think you'd probably be cool.
Oh yeah, 100%.
And aren't you glad? That's a survival instinct. Whatever.
So we've got some interesting points here. Is what is American culture? And the same criticism that Vivek had about American culture being a mediocre, brainwashed Marxism. Same way the Black American Hotep Jesus and Uncle Hotep had that perspective. And same with these kind of libertarian, right-wing leaning white people from Liberty Lockdown. You can see the channel here, Liberty Lockdown. They have a similar perspective, right? Now, what is American culture? Is the culture just to work and consume, right? I remember a funny lecture from a kind of right-wing white person, Jack Donovan, and he was talking about how Mexicans had moved to America, and there was a kind of a joke around, how do we know these Mexicans are now integrated and real Americans, and the thing was that they go to McDonald's and they drink Coca-Cola, because it's not clear what American culture is sometimes. I understand in the past you had rugged individualism, Ralph Waldo Emerson, you had the kind of the founding fathers of America, but to what extent it's that right now, I think it seems a lot of the times it's about working and consuming rather than some specific culture depending on race or religion like Christianity, right? And he's got a point. He's got a fair point, a point that I make, a point that we all seem to have consensus on, is that the Western culture in the mainstream, not people on the more fringes like myself or these guys or a Sargon, Lotus Eaters, Hotep Jesus, Shiva Ayadura, people like that. In mainstream society, what is the culture? It's woke, it's feminist, emasculating men, removing in-group preferences, even in-group nationalist preferences. Nationalism's bad. Anything, so many things that are good are considered bad. Even basic family formations considered a bad thing. It's all about just collecting a check and parroting the right opinions. And you see this all the time, right? And he's got a fair point around how there's a particular attack on white men, not just men, but white men in specifically. And America, like, why is America winning, right? Is America winning because it's focused on H1-B1 migrant workers? Is America winning because it's very pro-freedom, or because it has a lot of innovation and entrepreneurship, or because they basically have the world reserve currency with the dollars, or they have a massive military? It really does raise questions on how does the actual world really work? Where's the power and culture base here, right? In general. And the thing is, if these billionaires of Trump are saying America's great, but then they're saying Americans suck, it seems to be a contradiction. If you're saying Americans are lazy, what do you need to improve America? To have more migration, making America less white or more Indian, does that make America better? So it really does raise these type of very difficult questions on what's going on. But I believe the key issue here isn't race. While I understand race is a core component of a country's culture, I think the key thing is about improving American culture rather than taking in more migrant workers. So if you look at academia, right, there's this key term they're talking about, this type of brainwashed leftists. And it's a term called IYI, intellectual yet idiot, which is simply referring to Nassim Taleb's perspective. He's a famous author. He's written a book called Anti-Fragile. You might have heard a book called Anti-Fragile, Skin in the Game. I think he's got another book called Black Swan, things like that. He's a very famous author about different mental models. So very interesting guy. So essentially he talks about intellectual yet idiot, right? And this is the idea. You've got so many people in positions of power. They're intellectuals, they have masters, PhDs, they dictate down to you what to believe, have many positions in middle and senior management, school teachers, things like that. And all they do is they they dictate the social norms, they dominate policy making, academia, media, and they just parrot the official establishment agenda, even if it's completely brainwashed nonsense, right? And they rely on their credentials and have circular reasoning, superficial interpretation or analysis. It's just parroting, like I say, the mainstream establishment narrative. An NPC or normie who's essentially in a position of power or so-called expert, right? And the thing is, a lot of these perspectives are disconnected from reality. They have these misguided policies, and they contribute to the societal dysfunction. So a thing could be an example of this would be like their bias in academia against, using common sense. They'll just focus on what's in the textbook.
There you go.
Nick Fuentes is not the disease; he's a symptom of it. Do you not understand this? It's that you shamed young white men
what I am.
For decades.
I wouldn't be here. Like,
he's a symptom, but with more conviction.
You've created, in a very small sense, but I wouldn't be doing this, and neither would you, Clint. The culture created this. This is your fault if you don't like it. Sorry.
No, that's a great point. I wouldn't be a political commentator if you didn't lock down the fucking country. You idiots. You've created me. Don't blame me.
There's something strange about this.
Immigration destroyed entry-level jobs for American-born kids.
Yes.
It destroyed it. You do not see fucking any people, like everybody I knew in high school, everybody worked fast food. We worked the grocery stores. We were getting the carts, gas station. All of us did. This generation, almost none of them do.
Right.
And it's like, you don't think that's a fucking problem? You don't think that work ethic that you formulate when you're a young adult that carries on, that teaches you not just work ethic, but also jobs you don't want to have so you can kind of reorient as you're going to college and be like, hey, do I want to fucking work with my mind or do I want to hammer shit for the rest of my life?
I don't know what
like, if you don't have that first step on the ladder, you are fucking dooming these kids. And that's exactly what we've done for the past 20 years as we've allowed for increasing illegal immigration year after year. And as maybe these people aren't from California and they haven't seen it, but I'm telling you, it has completely absorbed 90% of entry-level jobs in these states that are especially border states. It's a tragedy.
For a guy with a brown face and a red dot to then look and say it's because Boy Meets World is insulting. It's like, well, it's from years of this policy. Yeah, sure, the culture does contribute to this in some sort of way, but that's like the sprinkling on the cake, man. We baked this.
I think to Dave's point, if he had really emphasized, which I think he should have, was that the ladder has been pulled up for a huge percentage of young white men in this country. And they happen to be the majority, or at least the plurality demographic is still young white men in America. And you've just said, fuck you. You're racist and you're the problem and you're basically the bane of our existence as a country. And then oh, you don't get married, you don't have kids. Oh, you don't make as much money as your father did or your parents did. You're such a failure in every regard. But here's the reality. The ladder was pulled up because of DEI policies and affirmative action policies that made college admittance more challenging, that made getting into corporate America more challenging. And it's like you've put road stops in front of them every step of their lives, and then you go, why aren't you as good as your parents? And they have to look in the mirror and say, if they don't understand how the system's been manipulated, many of them say, I don't know why. Why am I not doing as well as my dad did? And that hurts any young man that wants to achieve what their parents did before them. And it's like, you think that they're going to just eat that? Sure, some of them eat it and they become suicidal, or others go the other direction. They go, fuck you. And they figure out, all of the shenanigans that have been played to actually hurt them and put them at a deficit. And then they become groypers. This is my point, is that if you don't actually just be honest about this stuff, if you don't stop the shame game of, oh, I can't believe that you're this white nationalist shit, if you don't actually deal with what created this phenomenon, well, it's only going to grow. And that feeds directly into the system that the state is actually trying to work against, which is bigger three-letter agencies, bigger spying, bigger gun crackdowns, speech crackdowns, censorship. You don't want any of that, right? I don't. So how about we deal with the underlying problems that is creating the issue that is allowing for the state to metastasize? Sorry, I'll get off my soapbox.
Instead, now we're in this place where the stage has been set. There was kindling, and now we've got a full-blown fire. And that kindling was all of this resentment of a racial variety, right, for all the reasons that you just mentioned, that was sort of boiling up underneath the American cultural surface. And now I feel like we're in this place where, I know I keep alluding to it, and you have to forgive me if there's something wrong with me, but I go, it looks to me as though this really promising kindling was effectively set aflame by these little cultural moments along the way. And where we are now, it feels like this whole India conversation, like India just, got a nail in the coffin, because we were already in this place, for those of you who are on Twitter, where I guess you could say the noticing was like at this all-time high. And over the past year, I've really gotten this sensation that so much of the big cultural moments, especially the ones of the racial variety, are they're organic in the sense that they've been growing. The sentiments have been growing and developing for some time, but the moments that have taken off don't feel organic to me. They feel like somebody taking advantage of this kindling having existed previously. And so I look at this as, I don't think it's a joke, man. I'm not
So there is a brewing tension in society, right? He's mentioning how white men have become disillusioned, men in general, I would say. And I agree with his critique, is that Vivek, being someone from an Indian background who's been critical of American mainstream culture, TV shows, and blaming TV shows for what is a lot of deeper reasons as to why American culture or the West is kind of failing, right? It's not just the TV show Friends, and I understand he might not be the right messenger given he comes from an Indian background. He's not a white American. And the thing is, when it comes down to these entry-level jobs, they're making a fair point there. I remember working some entry-level jobs and having friends at college and high school who would work entry-level jobs and develop some good kind of lifestyle habits in terms of working effectively, being able to work with other people while you're at college and high school, working kind of lower-wage jobs, cafes, restaurants, retail jobs. Now a lot of those jobs do go to migrants, right? So you have a lot of people even at the lower end who can't get some basic income, and they can't develop those good kind of skills integrating into society, right? And it's true, right? When you don't have these entry-level jobs, you can't develop this work ethic. There is a particular bias, I would say, against men, against white men to a certain extent, with DEI, a lack of meritocracy, right? And it's just not a smart idea for any society or civilization to abandon men at such a broad level when your core demographic that builds a society, that maintains a society, is the working age, military age men, right? And if they're not going to be allowed in this system, or they're going to be excluded or heavily constrained or treated like they're castrated, neutered dogs, domesticated house pets, or told to be effeminate more in the workplace, they're just going to build a new system or destroy the system, right? Well, there's only two ways that can go. And there's lots of men dropping out and they're building their own system, whether it's living minimalistically in terms of off the grid, moving outside of the West. And the thing is, when it comes to playing the game for identity politics, of course, would be much stronger for men. Men have always been in the political sphere, always been in terms of power plays. So if we're going to have other demographics like women having the benefit of playing identity politics, playing the victim when it's convenient, and leveraging votes in that direction, you're going to see men playing that card of the identity politics of being an oppressed man more and more often, right? And this is the thing, right? I understand why Americans would feel insulted by some of this criticism, even though they do agree it is somewhat valid. And the social ladder being gone just to do basic things. You can say in the past, maybe the social ladder was disappearing to climb the income ladder to essentially earn higher salaries because older generations were staying for longer terms in middle management and senior management, but at least people could live a decent middle class lifestyle even if they didn't have the most success in the corporate world. But now you can't do that. Now you can't buy a house. Now you can't necessarily be in a happy, healthy, long-term relationship and have kids. And now it's like, oh, you can't even afford, your basic bills and food costs because of inflation. So when it comes to ruining social mobility, this leads to all the second order effects, sense of feeling loss, mental health issues, diagnoses, saying you've been set up to fail, which is some reality in that, and the whole failure to launch, where lots of men fail to launch. You might have heard that phrase, that they fail to launch into adulthood and become productive members of society, but then they've been essentially rug pulled, right? They've had the rug pulled from up underneath them and been put in this kind of disadvantaged situation, and then they get the blame, and then society blames them. So obviously they're going to be a backlash. There might be more leaning toward extremist views. They're going to want to look for answers on the internet and basically find an alternative solution if the system is rigging everything against them and expecting them to play along with it. That's why you have people looking at alternative income sources, making money online, and also people are kind of disaffected, particularly young white men, and they're all so annoyed with the censorship. So you can't really participate in this society effectively. You can't vent your frustrations because there's censorship. So eventually there will be a breaking point, and you can see society is definitely heading in that type of direction. Every day it's like one step closer towards something really bad happening in this country or in the West in general.
Nationalist. I'm not. But I really do understand the phenomenon. When you have black people that basically sound like white nationalists from the 1980s, like Myron Gaines does. He sounds like David Duke or some shit. This is a phenomenon that it's no longer racial either. This is just a young American man thing.
Yep.
They are seeing that they are being replaced. I know I can't say that, but that's how they feel. And if you don't deal with their concerns, young men are the most dangerous people in any culture, anytime, all over the world. That's just fucking reality. And if you're going to abandon them and shame them and disenfranchise them and then
tell them that their childhood is the reason for why they suck today, everything that they loved from their childhood.
That's a huge mistake by Vivek. I don't think he meant it that way. Again, he's right in his message, just like you got to know when you can say it. I know what I can say and what I can't say and what people will be mad at because of how I'm representing myself. That's kind of tone deaf for somebody who should know a little bit better. But to the Myron Gaines thing, and this is like a Pete Quinones thing. I had Merry Christmas. This has been like 3 years since he doxed you. But he said one thing, and I'll never forget. He's like, the empire's collapsing. Start building what you want to see in its stead. And the guy like Myron Gaines and Andrew Tate, we talk about this a lot, this red pill movement. They're building this thing. They've successfully seen what's wrong with men. They've positioned themselves in a way to say, follow me, young disassociated men or disaffected men, and we're going to move in this direction. And the direction they're going, young men, you don't want to go in that direction.
This is a huge problem because it's a power vacuum that's been created, and something needed to fill that wake. Something needed to step in its place. And I think the most damaging thing stepped in its place. And it's this idea that men need to be with a harem of women. Men need to be driving Bugattis. They need to be shirtless at a long table, eating dinner nightly with a bunch of other shirtless men smoking cigars.
That's all wrong.
It's all wrong. Can we just roll back to take responsibility, try to make your community better, try to better yourself, find someone, love someone, raise a child, raise a family, contribute to society, maybe strengthen your relationship with God if you believe you have a creator.
See, this is why I love
the other side did. Like Michelle Obama did the same thing with feminists in the last 10 years. She writes a book about being an independent woman, goes on Oprah, talks about this and all that, but it's like you're married to the strongest man in the world, the most powerful man in the world at the time, and you're telling your constituents, don't get married, don't seek a relationship, seek out your career, do this and that. You didn't do that. You're doing the opposite. And I think, Andrew Tate might be very well doing the opposite as well. And I don't know what they do in their personal lives.
I think he's like the feminist movement for men. The ways in which the feminist movement has failed women by telling them to focus on the wrong things is very similar. It rhymes with the ways in which this red pill movement is telling young men what's important.
Again, though, symptom, not the disease.
No. But what is disheartening is that we had a brief moment where that message was out there. And then something happened, and you can speculate as to what that something was, but Jordan Peterson was out there telling people to have families, to strengthen their relationship with God, to raise children, good children.
And then his life was ruined.
And then he went to Russia, stuck on benzos, came back wearing a two-tone suit.
And then the question stripped becomes, of his teaching credentials.
And to me, the question becomes, is that organic, or is there some other force steering culture? Because you look at the ones that are elevated and you look at the ones who had all that potential. I have those two books, 12 Rules for Life and 12 Additional Rules, Antidote to Chaos. They were tremendous. I took a lot of pointers on how to raise my son from Jordan Peterson. And now I look at that guy as a joke. And to me, it's not lost on me that somebody would have benefited from that. Somebody who didn't want to see that culture come to rise. Because that culture is the antidote for chaos. That is the remedy to fixing the holes in the cultural fabric, to bringing...
Now, I agreed broadly with a lot of points they've made previously, but this part I don't really agree with, right? I would say, firstly, this system replacing young men, obviously they're making a mistake, or I think we agree with the guys on this. And the thing is, men can do only two things in the world: to build something or destroy something. So either building a family, building a business, building a country, or destroying all of that, right? And if you look at how previous empires have collapsed, you can see how things actually work when you have large groups of men who are disaffected and don't want to keep propping up a failed system, right? Now, men are not going to contribute to a society where a lot of the corporations are kind of against them. Like we see with this H1-B visa, it's not prioritizing the countrymen in America. It's prioritizing cheaper migrant workers, regardless of which country they're coming from, India or otherwise. Then people are not going to be supporting that, right? What Trump and the MAGA movement, and however you want to describe it, Elon Musk, Grant Cardone, Vivek Ramaswamy, what they have to understand is the reason they have a power base is because they have the majority of working age men in America speaking up and saying the country's going in a bad direction, this is not going to end well, we're putting a vote in you to help move this in the right direction. Because if it moves in the wrong direction, it's going to be those men on the front line in America dealing with the dysfunction. I'll just leave it at that. If the empire's collapsing, the women are going to be locked at home and not getting involved on the streets. It's going to be, the dysfunction of society is going to be handled by the men. So it's like a final, I see like Trump as the final step before everything completely collapses. Not to say he's perfect, but just to say it's kind of men raising up the red flag, like this is not going to end well in this society. Not that they're going to do anything, those men particularly, but just the whole system being completely dysfunctional, right? Now, the thing is, like I say, men are not going to contribute and support leadership who are not going to support their best interest. They've seen how destructive feminism and liberalism and other ideologies have been. And normally that power vacuum wouldn't be filled up by a content creator. It'd be filled up by a strong leader of a country, right? Whether in the past, all these leaders, or can't even name some of these leaders, strong leaders of a country who would have military age men in the streets supporting them, doing military parades, turning up to protests and different events, right? And the thing is, what is the role of the majority of people who are disaffected in this society and they can't progress, right? What is the role of men, particularly in this particular comment around in this trash collapsing society, right? And it reminds me of the book by Julius Evola, Men Among the Ruins. You're in a collapsing society. What are you expected to do? To keep pushing for political change when your political representatives are constantly turning their back on you and saying we're going to promote migrant workers or diversity or feminism or whatever ideology that doesn't benefit you? How long until the dam breaks and people just said they've had enough, and you see people just overthrowing their country's leaders? Not saying I condone that, but it's obvious how things can end up when people's tensions are rising high and they can't afford their basic living costs, right? You have many concepts out there like Nietzsche and the Übermensch and this kind of ideal leader that people might follow. And the thing is, these guys are talking about community. It's too late for a lot of these things these guys are talking about. There's no real sense of community. That's not going to come up overnight. It'll take decades to do that. The whole thing of being in healthy relationships, having families, I'm not saying those are bad things. There's such a high failure rate with a high divorce rate of like 50%. So many dysfunctions when it comes to raising kids in this broken society, unless you kind of live off grid and you and your wife have a healthier culture, maybe a religious culture, your kids are homeschooled. These are all the extents you have to go through, constantly create layers of protection and insulation between you and this sick society. It's too late for that, really, right? You as a man in the society, you're kind of dealing with either brainwashed women or kids who come out the education system, and it's kind of too late to roll back some of these things you've let out the Pandora box, right? Now, the thing is, many men feel like they're being extorted by the high tax rate that gets wasted all the time, extorted by society that wants them to engage in a social contract that isn't working. So my guide to young men is kind of, my perspective is like, firstly, focus on your individual best interests, whether that's self-improvement or aggressively and assertively pursuing your self-interest, so you can make some sense of heaven or your slice of peace in this crazy world, right? This rigged, dysfunctional world, not looking for these group solutions that kind of don't exist. He mentions earlier in this little clip around, Michelle Obama's books. And I remember these books by Michelle Obama, these kind of feminist books. They're very popular in the finance industry. I remember a lot of female co-workers were reading these type of books. Other books like Lean In, Sheryl Sandberg. And the whole thing is the divide between men and women will continue. Jordan B. Peterson, who had that book 12 Rules to Life. These things are not going to save these things. These things are too soft. It's too late to take a soft hand approach to saving the West. I'll just leave it at that. And the thing is, what ends up happening is there's so many points of propaganda and brainwashing that are impacting every demographic, particularly women, in some cases older people who believe whatever the TV tells them. And time again, the demographic of the working age, military age men, their needs are overlooked. The fact they can see through all the government's lies are overlooked. They're getting labeled far right, incel, extreme, blah, blah, blah. And what ends up happening is this system is kind of neglecting the demographic that can really see through all the lies, right? And things are just going to keep building until they hit a breaking point. And the last vanguard of that is these men voting for Trump, these men thinking an Elon Musk or a billionaire who has some freedom of speech on Twitter is going to be their protection or some sense of decent leadership. Not saying they're putting all their faith in him, but if an Elon Musk turns their back on them and Trump and many others, you're going to see hell break loose because there's no other barrier, there's no other dam from them saying, okay, we'll keep playing in this rigged system, maybe it'll work out one day, maybe it'll work out one day. It's really too late. And I mean, things are eventually gonna reach a breaking point. I'll just leave it at that. It's too late for so many men to play along with normie society and take the scraps of what's left. And that's what I realized. You should just make the best of your life in these kind of very dysfunctional circumstances. Don't worry about, oh, we're trying to fix things, we need to have a debate with Elon Musk on Twitter. That's really a waste of your time. The globalist agenda will continue. You'll keep having intellectual idiots in positions of power, even though they keep getting debunked. You can see in this little side comment video the leader of this country getting debunked online as Keir Starmer. And you're going to keep having these type of dysfunctional systems. And if you want to waste your time getting involved in political debates, you can do that. Or complaining about migrant workers, you can do that. But these global institutions will continue their agenda. That's why you need to, if we're talking about careers, focus on building as much as you can, not worrying about saving everyone, but building a highly valued skill set, so you don't get have your job necessarily taken by migrant workers, or you have your own set of clients in some form of self-employment. And if you combine that with other things like self-sufficiency, maybe owning your own land, maybe taking care of your own family, or having your family members all focus on an element of self-sufficiency. Maybe you have a family member who's an accountant who can help you with accounting. You can focus on maybe construction work if manual labor is your thing. The whole point is just constantly never-ending pursuit of freedom and self-sufficiency. Freedom and self-sufficiency. Those are the two things you should be focused on, because the long march of globalists is going to continue, and you've got to look out for your best interest, right? But I think they make some good points. The criticism of America is valid, American culture is valid, and I think the general explanation of the disaffected masses of men, young white men, that's something that's very real, and I think that's just going to grow until there is a breaking point in some sense. Now, I worked in the finance industry for over a decade, and I offer career advice and genuine analysis to help you live through this very crazy time and succeed as best you can with very difficult circumstances. There's a link in the description if you want to speak with me directly. Let me know what you think about this perspective. In previous videos, I covered the Indian American perspective, the Black American perspective, and now you have the white American perspective. So let me know in the comments how you feel about this debate. And again, look out for your best interests. 2 recommended videos on your screen right now, and I'll see you next time.